It's a Parshas, Sparks, and Tidbits on the weekly Torah portion. This week, the portion is Vayishlach. Today happens to be a American holiday, Thanksgiving, which of course is rooted in and based on the biblical holidays of Thanksgiving, and there are many of those. Passover, of course, is Thanksgiving for the redemption. Shavuos is the Thanksgiving for the giving of the Torah. Sukkot is the thanksgiving for the protection and shelter that we were afforded. In addition to that, these three holidays are also agricultural holidays. Pesach is the holiday at the time when they would reap the barley. The barley crop would be ripe. Shavuos is the wheat crop. Sukkot is the ingathering of all the crops and all the produce that were left outside during the season of Passover and Shavuos. They would be brought into the home on Sukkot. So these are agricultural holidays, these are spiritual, historical holidays of Thanksgiving. Then, of course, we have the rabbinical holidays of Thanksgiving. We have Purim, which is salvation from Haman's plot to annihilate all the Jews. And we have Hanukkah, the victory of the Maccabees over the Syrian Greeks who wanted to destroy Jewish practice. So we were saved, and therefore we give Thanksgiving, Hodah. The idea of Thanksgiving is not just during the holidays, but it's also true every time we take a piece of food. Before we eat the food, we recite a blessing in which we show our gratitude to God for giving us the food. After we finish eating, we also recite blessings. And throughout the day, we wake up in the morning, there's a whole series of blessings. Blessing that the rooster has the wisdom to know the difference between day and night. That we can open our eyes, that we can move, that we can stand, that we have shoes, we have clothing, so on and so forth. So Judaism is not just about Thanksgiving one day a year, it's about Thanksgiving virtually every day. In fact, there's an expression of the Talmud based on the last verse of the book of Psalms, Kol haneshama tahalelka, every soul shall praise God. But the word neshama could also come from the word neshima, which means breath, that we have to thank God for every breath. We just can't physically thank Him for every breath, because then we would be doing nothing else but thanking. But the idea is that Thanksgiving is something that occurs every day and every moment. I might have mentioned this in an earlier broadcast, but it bears repeating that we have to be very careful that we understand what gratitude really is. Gratitude is not saying, I'm thankful, because it doesn't give an address to whom you're thankful. You have to say, I'm thankful to God. If someone else helped you, I'm thankful to that person, because the whole idea of gratitude is that it's not just about us, it's about the other, the big other, capital O, or the other human who had provided me with whatever it is that I'm grateful for. So for people to say, I'm grateful for something without adding on the object of their gratitude misses the whole point, because then the focus is that I am grateful. I am so happy that I have such good fortune, which means that you're thinking about yourself and how good things are for you, and you're not really directing that to the other, that it's really the other that has to be thanked, to whom gratitude must be shown, and appreciation for what they did, not what you have, and you're reveling in your own good fortune. We start the day, by the way, with the words Moda. The first word a Jew is supposed to recite when he wakes up in the morning is Moda Ani, which we translate in English as I give thanks, but in truth, the Hebrew syntax is the reverse. Thanks I give. The first word is Moda. And throughout the prayers we have the word Hodu, Modim, and in fact the word Jew comes from the word Yehuda, Judah, fourth son of Jacob, whose name was given because his mother said, now I thank God. There's another concept of gratitude, another holiday, I should say, of gratitude, a more recent holiday, and that we'll be observing this Tuesday, Yud Tes Kislev, the 19th day of the month of Kislev, which is the anniversary of the liberation of the Alter Rebbe, the first leader, Hasidic leader of Chabad, Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi, who was arrested by people who plotted against him because of his role in spreading the teachings of Hasidic philosophy. He was charged with treason because he was supporting the Jews in Israel, the destitute in Israel, which was then under Turkish rule, and Turkey and the Russian government didn't exactly get along. They, of course, fabricated different types of charges against him, and he was finally vindicated on the 19th day of the month of Kislev. This goes back to the year 1798. And the Alter Rebbe, as he was called, the old rabbi, to distinguish him from the subsequent leaders, declared this day to be a major holiday, a miracle that everyone saw. In fact, the ministers of the Russian government saw the truth of Torah, the truth of the Hasidic teachings. That itself was a great wonder. So this is a day that is celebrated by Hasidim and has been designated by one of his successors, the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, as the Rosh Hashanah, the new year for Hasidic teaching. So we have another holiday of Thanksgiving in this coming week on Tuesday. Today, the 14th of Kislev, is also a very important date in the Hasidic calendar. It is the 90th anniversary of our Rebbe, the leader of Chabad, who was married to his wife, Rebbetzin Chayamushka Schneerson, 90 years ago. And it's a time when we reflect on our relationship with the Rebbe, who has led us and continues to lead us towards the coming of Mashiach and the redemption. Now, returning to our Parsha, the Torah weekly portion, it's Vayishlach. Jacob is returning now from his uncle Lavan to Esav, his brother, not knowing what lies in store for him, because his brother Esav wanted to kill him. That's the reason he had fled in the first place. And now he's coming back with a large family, 11 children. He has an incredible amount of livestock, servants, and he's a very wealthy man. He's coming back, and he doesn't know how his brother's going to receive him. So he sends malachim, messengers, to see how his brother's reaction is to his coming. Rashi tells us these were not ordinary messengers, these were angels. How does Rashi know they were angels? So some commentaries say because in the very end of last week's Torah portion, it talks about how angels escorted him. So we assume that these malachim, which can mean either angels or just human messengers, are most likely the same types of angels that were mentioned before. There it says clearly angels of God. That's one of the interpretations. The Rebbe gave a very simple explanation how we know that these were not mortals, because Jacob was concerned that his brother Esav had intention of killing him. If Jacob would have sent human messengers, he would have been putting them in danger, that Esav might have taken out his anger on Jacob's messenger. So he was not allowed to send human messengers. If you have access to angels who have no fear, then that would be fine. The Hebrew term for angels is malachim, but malachim could also mean messengers. So Rashi adds the word malachim mamash, literally angels. Not messengers, but literal angels, because angels are also divine messengers, but that when we use the word malach, or malachim, the plural, we usually mean the godly angels, the spiritual beings. But the Mezritcher Maggid, the Maggid of Mezrich, he was the successor of the Baal Shem Tov as the leader of the Hasidic movement and the teacher of Rabbi Shneor Zalman, whose day of passing is also Yutes Kislev, the 19th of Kislev, this coming week on Tuesday. He said something very deep. He said, Jacob sent angels, but mamash could also mean the substance, the physicality of the angels. What does that mean? Angels are spiritual beings, but even spiritual beings have a spiritual body and a spiritual soul. He did not send their soul. The soul belonged to Jacob. In other words, what this teaches us, the Rebbe tells us, is that whenever we send our own angels, our own messengers, our own scouts to see what a certain situation means for us, how we're supposed to relate to it, do we engage in certain activities, mundane activities, we want to make sure they're kosher, they're acceptable, we want to know how to engage those, how to interact with those situations, with those experiences. So we send messengers, we send our mind, our ability to analyze things to filter things, but we never send the soul of our angels. We always send the body. In other words, we make sure that our soul, our true inner desires, should never remain with the outside. It always remains faithful to our inner selves and our spiritual identities. Then Jacob gets the message that that Esau, his brother, is plotting to attack him. How did he know that? Because he's coming towards him with 400 armed men. So Jacob is now preparing himself, and as Rashi tells us, he made a three-pronged preparation. Number one, he's prepared to fight. There's a canard that Jews never defend themselves, never fight, which is absolutely false. Judaism requires self-defense. However, when there is no chance of self-defense, we don't just fight for the sake of fighting. Judaism's emphasis on life is of paramount importance. Can we save lives by fighting? Absolutely. We're required to do it. The Talmud uses an expression: if someone comes to kill you, hashkem lehargo, get up early to kill that person. Tragically, it's something that you don't want to do. Jacob, it says in the Torah a little bit later, that he was afraid and he was very concerned. As Rashi says, he was afraid of being killed, and he was very much afraid of killing others. No one wants to engage in warfare and battle, but self-defense is not only a right, it's a mitzvah, it's an obligation. So that was something that Jacob was prepared for. He was prepared for fighting, and in doing so, he divided his camp into two, so that if one camp is attacked and defeated, the other camp will be able to escape. The second thing he was prepared was doron, a gift. He was prepared to send Esau an elaborate gift as a way of appeasing him. Well, that sounds like a bribe, but yes, if it's in order to make peace, in order to ameliorate a very difficult situation, we can utilize a gift to help bring the person closer to yourself, so there should be no violence. There is nothing wrong with that. It's not the ideal that you have to do that, but it's something that is acceptable under these conditions. And the third thing was, of course, prayer. Those are the three things that we have to use in terms of our self-defense. One of the Hasidic masters explained that these three approaches are reflected in the Shema. When we say to God, we're told by God rather, V'ahavta, you shall love God your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. So when it says with all your heart, how do we serve God with our heart? So the Talmud says that's what prayer is. Prayer is service of the heart. So Jacob was prepared for prayer. He was going to give his whole heart. Then he was prepared to fight. When you fight, you're prepared to even die for your cause. In every war, tragically, there are casualties. That's the second love, b'chol nafshecha, with all your soul, that even if you're required to give your life for God, you're prepared to do that as well. That's another level of love, a stronger level of love. Then it says, b'chol meodecha, with all your might, which the Talmud translates to mean with all your money, with all your resources. That's the third thing, the gift. You have to be prepared to give a gift. And these things translate into our own lives, that we have to be prepared to give God our heart, our lives, and our resources. The Torah says that he was distressed. Why was he distressed? As I said before, because, as Rashi says, he was afraid he would be killed, or he would kill others. There's a Hasidic interpretation. If you read the continuation of that verse, it says, he was afraid, and he's very distressed, and he divided his camp into two. So one commentary says, what was he so distressed about that he was forced to divide his camp into two? Whenever you have to divide in order to save yourself, it's a tragedy. Division of people into different groups, for whatever reason, it is a sign of crisis. And sometimes it's a sign of negative energy. That is what he was concerned. He was concerned that if he divides his people, they will grow separate and not be in the same state of unity and love for one another. Yaakov, when he speaks to God, he uses the term katonti. I have become diminished. I'm no longer worthy of God's miracle. Even though God promised him he'll protect him, he felt he's diminished because of all the kindness that he already experienced. The Alter Rebbe, whose holiday of liberation we'll be celebrating Tuesday, as I mentioned before, he explains that when Jacob says, I've been diminished because of all the kindness, that there are two kinds of reactions to things that you get that make you wealthier than you were before. If you have more wealth or more positive things coming to you, you can have two reactions. One reaction can be, I'm becoming more arrogant. Look how special I am. Look how great I am. Look how rich I am. We have people who will gloat and brag about their wealth, whether it's financial wealth or whether it's other forms of wealth. But a true righteous person will feel humbled because he sees in the kindness of God, he sees God's presence. And when you're in God's presence, you're very small. So Jacob says, I have become diminished. I have been so overwhelmed by God's kindness that I feel so humbled and so small. Now, after Jacob sends his entourage, and they're crossing over and they're coming closer to Esav, all of a sudden, he remains alone. This is in chapter 32, verse 25. Why is he all alone? He had a whole entourage. So Rashi says because he left behind some small jugs and he went back to get it. And then he had a wrestling match, lasted until dawn. What was going on over here? Why was he going back? So Rashi says because he left some jugs. So he put his life in danger to be all alone because of a few jugs. And the Talmud says, well, here we see that righteous people care more about their property than they care about their own lives, which is very strange. And that's not to be taken literally. What it means is that they realize that everything that they own was given to them by God to be used for higher purposes. And in the terminology of Kabbalah, of Jewish mysticism, every physical thing has sparks of holiness. When you use it for the right purpose, you extricate and liberate those sparks and generate tremendous amounts of positive godly energy. So they care more about the things that they own, that they don't want to lose that additional spiritual value they can get out of their possessions. But then there's an interesting midrashic interpretation that the word levado, which means alone, could be read likado, to his pitcher, to his jug. And it's talking about one jug in particular. This is the jug, the cruse of oil that was found during the period of Hanukkah. We know the story of Hanukkah. The Greeks came into the temple and they desecrated it, and they took all the oil and they contaminated it. And when the Jews came and rededicated the temple after their victory over the Syrian Greeks, they looked around for oil. They couldn't find any fresh oil. They found one jug of oil that was sealed with the seal of the high priest. Quite an unusual thing, which is a miracle in and of itself, that they found it. And that is what they used for lighting the menorah in the temple. They had enough for one night, and of course we all know the miracle that it lasted for 8. That jug of oil was the jug of oil that Jacob went back to reclaim. Whether it's to be taken literally or it's to be taken figuratively, it certainly has a lot of deep meaning. That jug of oil, the uncontaminated, sealed jug of oil, represents the essence of our souls that is always pure and cannot be contaminated no matter what. And Jacob knew that he needed the strength to come from that jug of oil, and that's why he risked his life to go get that jug of oil, to give him the potential to awaken within himself and within his progeny this essence of the soul that is so pure and so powerful. And now he goes into a wrestling match with a man. Who was this man? Our sages tell us, and Rashi quotes this, this was none other than the angel that was Esav's guardian angel. And he wrestles with him all night, and he cannot win over Jacob. And Jacob has him held down, and he wants to leave. And Jacob won't let him leave until he blesses him. And this is after he struck Jacob in his thigh. He dislocated the sciatic nerve. So Jacob is holding him down. He says, you have to bless me. And he says, what's your name? Jacob. From now on, it's not Jacob, but it's Israel. What's the difference? The word Jacob comes from the word that means heel. Heel means you're a follower. You're under someone else's domination, someone else's dominion. Israel comes from the word to be victorious. You were victorious over people and over God's angels. That's a name that represents the Jewish people on a higher level, in a higher state. So that was the blessing that he gave him. Now, these two names of Jacob and Israel remained. The old name was not removed. In fact, most of the time we refer to the patriarch as Jacob and not as Israel. We call the Jewish people the children of Israel. And the reason why we haven't changed his old name is because both names represent the Jewish people in two different states of being. In the weekdays, we're Jacob. We're part of the world. On Shabbat, on the Sabbath, we are Israel. We are above the world. We have control over it. We're no longer subservient to the world. In the days of exile, we are Jacob primarily. In the Messianic age, we will be primarily Israel. So the two names represent two different stages, two different periods within the framework of Jewish existence. One more point. Jacob and Esau finally meet. After Esau sees this elaborate gift, they finally meet, and they fall in each other's necks, and they embrace, and Esau kisses Jacob. And in the Torah scroll, there are dots on the word, and he kissed him. Whenever there are dots on the Torah scroll has no punctuation, that's a sign that the word has to be qualified. And there are two interpretations Rashi quotes. One says that he did not really do it sincerely. This kiss was not sincere. The other opinion, given by Rabbi Shimon, by Yochai, says no. We know that there's a law that Esau hates Jacob, but in that moment, he had a fleeting sense of weakness, of love, and he was sincere in his love of Jacob. We know that in the future Messianic age, there will be a rapprochement between Jacob and Esau. Esau will be refined and be elevated. The seeds for that were probably planted at this moment when they embraced and they kissed. But it's interesting that Rashi uses the term, there's a law that Esau hates Jacob. That anti-Semitism is a law. What is the meaning of that? Rabbi Menachem Zemba, one of the great luminaries in Poland, murdered by the Germans during the Warsaw Ghetto situation before the uprising, he said that anti-Semitism is not based on logic, because if you bring the anti-Semites into one room, they'll cancel each other. One will say Jews are capitalists, one will say Jews are communists, one will say Jews are pushy, one will say Jews are passive, one will say Jews are aggressive, they like to fight, and one says no, Jews don't like to fight. And Jews are involved in everyone else's business. Jews keep to themselves. All of the arguments against the Jewish people are contradictory to the other arguments. Well, that tells you that it's not rational. It's like a law that doesn't have to make any sense. Laws in the Torah were given without us questioning them. Well, that's the law of anti-Semitism. It's totally irrational. So what does that tell us? So how do you fight irrationality? Try to explain to an anti-Semite that he's wrong? No, it won't work. We transcend our own reasoning. We do things beyond our understanding. We go beyond the letter of the law, beyond the limits of our mind and understanding. And the Talmud tells us that Mashiach will come when we no longer think about him. And the Alter Rebbe, whose liberation I said will be this Tuesday, explains that Mashiach, the Messianic age, is an age when we will transcend reason. And that's the way we are able to overcome the threat from the senseless and irrational hatred that exists in the world. Have a good Shabbos, a happy Yom Kislev, and we'll see each other, God willing, next week again for our next broadcast.